And also, in some, by the way, this is so touching. This is gold to me to hear all of this. It really is. In some of the transcripts, Davanloo would say, I'm not neutral here. I hope you decide to take down the wall, but the choice is yours. I also felt that that was a way that he was being really real and showing up as a person, that he was honest, that he
Oh, yeah,
actually
yeah.
that he had hopes for the patient.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's some sort of systematic things that he would do with that, especially with depressed people, because depressed people have trouble mobilizing the energy to stand up to their defenses.
Mm.
For example, he would, at some point, as he was building towards working to open the unconscious, would find out sometimes by even asking more or less explicitly what some of the things were that they were important about their abilities. So, for example, one woman who had problems with depression, who had had a pretty traumatic childhood, but had gotten some previous therapy and had some positive life experiences that led her to go from not wanting to have children to wanting to have children. And by the time he saw her, she had children, and she felt that she was doing a good job of being a good mother. So he had that history. And then when he was pushing her to overcome the resistance, he says, "We know you're a capable woman. You know, you have mothered those children the way you have, and they are doing well, and you have your achievements." But he wouldn't say just you have your achievements unless he knew what they were. It couldn't be bullshit. And so he would refer to the specific things. So there's a capable side of you, but then there's a destructive side that wants to give up and sell yourself short. So you want to bow down to that, or
Yep.
it's
Yep.
always
Right.
the helping them to mobilize the hope and the implicit communication is that you believe in them
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can see that side of them.
Yeah, yeah. The way you're simulating these interventions is just how I remember so much of what Davanloo did in the tapes that I saw. And it was a big part of what I was taught by Marvin, frankly, this
Mm-hmm.
element of standing up to the superego, modeling for the patient how to stand up to the superego resistance. I don't
That's
necessarily
well put. The issue of modeling, the
oh,
identification with the therapist's attitude. It goes to the one question you had about talking down to the
yeah. Yes, yes. That is not spoken a whole lot about in the circles that I travel in. Um, would you be willing to discuss a little bit about talking down to the superego and to what extent that was actually really central to Davanloo's work?
it's that's when I wrote some notes on. Let me look at my notes.
Yeah, go for it.
What I observed is a man who was just fascinated by the human mind and fascinated by how to help people, you know,
Mm.
uh, uh, open up and get to the bottom of the destructive forces within them. And and that was an ongoing process. I want to read with you just a couple sentences from page 3 of Unlocking the Unconscious.
Please.
This is the bottom of page 3. I have worked out standard types of intervention based adapted to each move on the patient's part. These interventions have often been reached intuitively, and it is then only in retrospect that I have been able to describe theoretically what I have been doing. So all of these metapsychological concepts, they are developed after the fact, and the working out process, which he doesn't describe here, he is described in the training programs. He basically would get an idea about something, and then he would try it out. And because early on he was able to get access to video technology, he would then try it out in the next several patients and review it and analyze it and refine the hypotheses that had led him to do that. And then he would go on to the next step of refining the intervention, and then trying next. So it's very systematic work, and that passion to understand and the energy to do that much work is something that stayed with him and until the last times I saw him.
Can you say a little bit more about the danger of reifying parts of Davanloo's work? Can you elaborate?
Well, it goes back to that sentence I read. He figured things out and did them and saw what happened, and then he took the framework that he and many people in the field had at the time, which was psychoanalysis, and which had also helped him get to that because he was trained as a psychoanalyst, and then systematize them from there. Maybe you've heard this story from Marvin, but I told you we had to each go to a 1 week long, what do they call it? He called them what he now calls metapsychology courses. So we went to one in New York City, by in a hotel by the UN, and at the break, Marvin and I were there talking to a person from California who's a Gestalt therapist, somebody from England who was a Melanie Kleinian analyst. I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
A little bit.
Melanie Klein. I mean, she really emphasized the pre-genital forces in development. Somebody who was a behavior therapist from, I'll say Philadelphia, but I don't know if that's really where they were from because that's where Beck was from. But and they're arguing about this this is this kind of intervention. This is a brilliant Kleinian intervention. No, it's a Gestalt intervention. And the issue is the intervention is what it is. And you can probably talk about it in a variety of different ways. And the exact, if you start to make your judgments about what you do based on how it fits into a theory, it can be dangerous. It gets to another thing I thought after seeing your questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about, and that is, when I first saw Davanloo, I told you I was sort of cynical because he was being outrageous to rotely, reify metapsychological concepts when they didn't start out that way at all, is a mistake. And whether you do it as a Gestalt therapist or as a behavior therapist or whatever, or whether, so that's why I gave those three things, or whether what you call it doesn't matter. And the issue of, it does matter in terms of you having a path to learning it. But when you're in the room with another human being, the issue is you and that other human being. And by the way, there's a literature behind that that's totally separate from Davanloo with Jerome Frank on the non-specific effects of psychotherapy.
Have you ever seen the opposite, where a therapist has worked through a lot of their own resistance against emotional closeness, but there's a bit of a sort of flying by the seat of their pants and a lack of discipline in their clinical thinking? Does that ever become a problem?
Well, it's only a problem if their sense of connection is defective also, because the risk would be that if you're stirring things up, and that is a danger. You can stir things up that can precipitate a depression, which sort of gets on to one of your other questions. But I have seen people who've had some training with Davanloo, and they learn to pressure and challenge, and pressure and challenge, and pressure and challenge, and they are not connected with what impact it's having on the person. And saw a casualty. This is of somebody who had had a year-long major depression that really crippled their functioning, precipitated by that kind of treatment.
So isolation of affect, and then repression, and then projection and splitting.
Well, yeah, the regressive defenses would be the category.
Yeah.
That's the closest thing to what you're. You know, I never heard Davanloo call them systems of defense, but maybe he did. And I don't object to that term. I mean, as you know, as you can see, I'm not. It's sort of like whatever works for a given individual's way of understanding what they're doing, as long as it is connected to the truth of what's going on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So, Dr. Schubmehl, such a pleasure to see you. We spent a little bit of time in Montreal in 2012 and I believe 2013. And
you have a better memory for the dates than I do.
Okay, it's been a minute. So first of all, thank you for doing this with me. I'm so excited.
Sure.
Would you be willing to say a little something about your career?
Okay, I'm Jim Schubmehl. I'm a board certified psychiatrist who still has his license but doesn't practice, except I need the license to do the teaching I do at the University of Rochester in the psychiatric residency program, where I teach a course on Davanloo's intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, and I also supervise psychiatric residents and some junior faculty members. Some of that is actually paid and some is volunteer work, and I've done that for now many years. When I went to the APA, I saw that there were these courses, which I didn't know that much about before, but so, and I thought, they sent me here and they maybe had this crisis team, and I don't know, we learned about long-term psychotherapy mainly in residency. So there are 2 courses on short-term dynamic psychotherapy, one by James Mann, and the other by David Mallon and Habib Davanloo. Now, we'd read Mallon's book during residency, and a couple of analysts had taught us something about it, but they were pretty skeptical. So I figured, well, I don't know who this Davanloo is, must be one of Mallon's students. Well, I get in there and Mallon introduces Davanloo as this guy has leapfrogged the field, and it turns out it was the other way around. And I saw the video recording of a case. I don't know if you have seen it, but he still has shown it, some even in recent years, of a young woman who had sexual difficulties. She was like 20 or something. Had sexual difficulties, but she also had difficulty. She needed to have a GYN examination and would not let the doctors examine her. So she had a tremendous degree of stubbornness and defiance. Was a sort of a core issue, and Davanloo's there, engaging her with this in a way that was totally anathema to everything I learned about technique from my psychoanalytic psychotherapy and psychoanalysis training to that point. But everything he said also made sense. And then there's some breakthrough, and it was like, as the expression always comes to my mind is, and it totally knocked my socks off. And I, through the first part, I mean, I was just, trying to pick holes in what he was doing, saying, that can't be right. You can't do that. He's attacking her, this and that. But then as I said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. She has a breakthrough, and and she's somebody who'd been defiant in every area of her life, and including the pediatrician didn't want her in the office anymore when she was a little girl, because she would just totally raise hell. So that knocked my socks off. I came back, and then they said, "Hey, Dr. Schubmehl, you know anybody good to have? We've got money for a teaching day." These were different times. I said, "Yeah, we got to have this guy Davanloo here." So they said, "Well, invite him." Then so we had Davanloo down for a teaching day, and then we had him back a year or so later. And by then, Marvin Scorman, who I know started at the mental health center within a few weeks of me. And he and I and the chief psychologist, Dr. Bernie Schwartz, and his wife, who was a psychiatric social worker who trained at Smith, which is a psychoanalytic psychotherapy oriented place, and a few other people on our area, including my brother Bill, who's a psychiatric social worker, were really interested and arranged to start to get training with Davanloo. And he said he would do it as long as we formed a teaching institute. So that's how it got started. Oh, and by the way, I took the course with Davanloo because the other one was full. The James Mann course was full, so it was my second choice. And as which sometimes that's the way things go in life. So then we would at first we went up to Toronto, and there was a group already in Toronto, so we would meet there for a week, and that's when it goes on to the issue of the nature of the training. For us to do this training, each of us had to attend 3, he called them immersion courses then. He later went on to call them metapsychology courses. But 2 of them could be shorter courses, which I forgot if they were 2 or 3 days, and one had to be a full week course.
What year was this? Year.
This would have been, well, we actually started the supervision with them in 1985.
Wow.
What year were you born?
82.
Okay, so yeah, no 3-year-olds were allowed. So we so that because it was in the summer, I guess it would have been, I think we started in the summer. So each of us had a 2-hour block where we would play back our recordings. We'd formed this group already with a group of about 7 here in Rochester, and we were already recording and meeting and going over them with each other, but we didn't know what the hell we were doing, and some of the things we were trying to get each other to do were not right. So I, in general, would not suggest that based on just reading things and seeing a couple of interviews. So then we were in Toronto, and there was a group of some fine folks there that were in the training with us, and we met in conjunction with them for I think it was for 2 years. 1 year, all of them were in a hotel conference room in Toronto. 1 year, half of them were at a new center that they actually had in Toronto, and half of them were in Rochester at the mental health center. And then we went on after that to have it with just us, and he came to Rochester and presented some bigger conferences, and around, I don't know what I need my next younger brother because he keeps track of dates of things. After a couple of years of that, he came down and we did a major conference, and we had the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry as a discussant, and after that, his name is Harut Babigi, and he invited us to teach in the residency program, and that's how that conference, because the mental health center was not affiliated with the University of Rochester. It was affiliated with Rochester General Hospital, but it was actually a separate corporation. So the group had a few years of training with them, but I was this became my passion, and I just wanted to continue the training beyond what the other members of the group could or wanted to do, and I was in more or less continuous training of one sort or another from 1985 until 2015.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm a slow learner.
Stop it. You probably have the longest stint of training with Davanloo there is. Is that fair to say?
I think there's a good chance of that. I mean, I don't know. Some of the Europeans had a fair amount, but probably yes.
Wow.
And I mean, I joke that I'm a slow learner, but part of the issue is Davanloo was evolving during that time. And that's one of the, with you had some questions about metapsychological concepts, is those have not been static over the years anymore. And they weren't static with Freud, for example.
You're reading my mind. I'm so interested in learning your take on Davanloo's evolution over the decades, right? What did you notice? What did you observe about how it shifted?
Well, I mean, what I observed is a man who was just fascinated by the human mind and fascinated by how to help people, open up and get to the bottom of the destructive forces within them. And and that was an ongoing process. I want to read with you just a couple sentences from page 3 of Unlocking the Unconscious.
Please.
This is the bottom of page 3. I have worked out standard types of intervention adapted to each move on the patient's part. These interventions have often been reached intuitively, and it is then only in retrospect that I have been able to describe theoretically what I have been doing. So all of these metapsychological concepts, they are developed after the fact, and the working out process, which he doesn't describe here, he is described in the training programs. He basically would get an idea about something, and then he would try it out. And because early on he was able to get access to video technology, he would then try it out in the next several patients and review it and analyze it and refine the hypotheses that had led him to do that. And then he would go on to the next step of refining the intervention and then trying next. So it's very systematic work. And that passion to understand and the energy to do that much work is something that stayed with him and until the last times I saw him. I'll jump forward to the end of the training that I had with him was in the mobilization program, where there were usually about a dozen people who'd already had, each of us had already had several years of training with him, some of them many years of training. But we wanted to really get better. And one of the things that we all knew was that our own unresolved characterologic problems were a major obstacle. And that as we went through that process, which Davanloo was just developing at the time. I mean, he didn't have something in the can. Okay, you can roll in this because I've got this going. That evolved over time, but that's a little bit of a diversion. Much of the time he would have me be sort of the the coordinator for the program, which meant I kept time on when we had to do things, and we'll take a break for lunch until thus and such a time, and then when we were done, if we were all in one place, I said, okay, come on, everybody get back in the room. Let's get going. But we met in a conference room at his accountant's office that he rented from the accountant because it had a nice private space, and the guy didn't need it, and it was so it was private and confidential. And so in the morning he would and he wasn't still driving himself, but he had a driver who would drive his car, and he would pick me up at the hotel, and I'd get in the car and he'd say, yeah, how are you this morning, Dr. Schubmehl? I said, I'm fine. How are you, Dr. Devlin? He says, fine. I have been I had analyzed the work yesterday and the interview of this person with this person, and then he would have spent hours going over the video of what was already an exhausting day of work.
Mm.
And then he would sort of go over what what his analysis with me to sort of bounce it off me. And not that he was looking for that much input, but I mean, he knew I would be, direct and honest with him if there were something there. If he'd said, "Oh, that's actually not what happened," that but and then we'd get there, and he would then spend a while teaching about that, including showing the video that showed. So it would be a little bit of a refinement and that's the same process by which he developed the original the technique from the start, and he's just kept working at it and working at it.
The question about the evolution of Davanloo. So when I read some of the transcripts, I get the sense that transcripts that appear to be from the 80s, that Davanloo was perhaps a little less single-minded about major unlockings. I got the sense that sometimes the patient in the transcript, right, it would say the patient might say something really forthcoming and be really open and honest, and then in the commentary it would say, I was satisfied with that, and then he would move on. Whereas in the later transcripts, I got the sense he was much more single-mindedly focused on the unlockings. Any reflections on that?
I have not. I do not have a sense from my own experience with those that would confirm or disconfirm your observation. There were, and I don't remember the details of this, but I do remember at one point he was playing a video of something, and I think I asked him, "Would you do anything differently now?" And there was something that he would do a little bit different, but the importance of mobilizing the unconscious, which is what the unlocking achieves. He was, I think he became convinced that happening through the experience of the transference, first the transference component of resistance with the complex transference feelings, then breaking through that and actually being experienced, and then the connection to the traumatic developmental experiences and objects, people, was really crucial to get the maximum power of healing and of being able to get character change, because the clarity with which the patient, first of all, the relief that the patient would experience, and with actually experiencing the feelings that at some point early in life have been too disturbing in one way or too dangerous in one way or another to experience, and to be able to experience them and experience them not just as something that happened momentarily, but for working through with repeated unlockings, freed up the other aspects of the psyche to not have to defend against that stuff anymore. And secondly, the clarity of the experience of that, I've been anxious around powerful men my whole life, and I've had to feel like I'm on guard, and I need to please them, and so on. And then to have the experience that that those powerful men, it's not the people out there in the sea then that I actually have those feelings about. It's the little boy who had that vis-a-vis daddy, and was terrified of that, because to be in touch with all the feelings about that meant, murdering the father who he also loved,
Yeah.
and feeling a massive guilt about that, or being in danger of being murdered by him, or both.
Yeah.
So and to have the clarity, not just cognitively, but at a gut level, is what is so powerfully freeing, when you really can work those things through.
Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, it's important not to reify things too much. A lot of people got a lot of benefit from a lot of therapy done by me and my colleagues, where the depth of the unlockings and so on, and the degree of working through, like I just described, it was far short of that. For example, I'm in the parking lot of BJ's. This was, I don't know, a few years ago. It said, "It's Dr. Schubmehl, Dr. Schubmehl." And I said, "What's that?" And it was somebody I'd seen for a few sessions, and they recognized that I didn't recognize them. And I was straightforward, but I said, "You obviously know me, but I'm not sure who you are." And they just gushed about how the huge impact I had on their life. And when I got home, I looked at my office the next time. I looked at my notes, and I remembered them then. And I thought, boy, I thought I totally failed with that person, that I'd, or that I'd been of minimal help.
Wow.
And things like that have happened more than once.
Mm-hmm.
People who I've seen a lot of their work and thought, well, they're doing a mediocre job of Davanloo's work. I've then run into people who saw them for therapy, and and it's people who had a lot of therapy before, so it's totally different and helped me a tremendous amount more.
Wow.
So for that, those experiences have been important to me. Now, I think I talk about it differently than Davanloo would. I don't know what he would say, but he was so powerfully driven to do, to get the apps, to develop the maximum amount that he could by his the sort of research exploration, research, whatever you want to call it, process that he had, that his way of thinking and talking about it would be that more towards aiming to get the other. And that's what he was aiming for us to do within the mobilization program, as a training process. He always said it wasn't therapy, but I think that was partly a medical legal protection.
Can you say a little bit more about the danger of reifying parts of Davanloo's work? Can you elaborate?
Well, it goes back to that sentence I read. He figured things out and did them and saw what happened, and then he took the framework that he and many people in the field had at the time, which was psychoanalysis, and which had also helped him get to that, because he was trained as a psychoanalyst, and then systematize them from there. Maybe you've heard this story from Marvin, but I told you we had to each go to a 1 week long, what do they call it? He called them what he now calls metapsychology courses. So we went to one in New York City, by in a hotel by the UN, and at the break, Marvin and I were there talking to a person from California who's a Gestalt therapist, somebody from England who was a Melanie Kleinian analyst. I don't know. Do you know anything about that?
A little bit.
Melanie Klein. I mean, she really emphasized the pregenital forces in development. Somebody who was a behavior therapist from, I'll say Philadelphia, but I don't know if that's really where they were from, because that's where Beck was from. But and they're arguing about this, this is this kind of intervention. This is a brilliant Kleinian intervention. No, it's a Gestalt intervention. And the issue is the intervention is what it is, and you can probably talk about it in a variety of different ways. And the exact, if you start to make your judgments about what you do based on how it fits into a theory, it can be dangerous. It gets to another thing I thought after seeing your questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about, and that is when I first saw Davanloo, I told you I was sort of cynical because he was being outrageous. And I said, he's attacking her, and but he's attacking the bad stuff, but he's attacking her. And then I would say, yeah, but he's really putting her on the spot about the problems that she came in with. And then I realized that okay, that was one experience. Another experience is when we were teaching in the residency program, one of our members presented a case of an unlocking of the paper shredder man or woman, I forgot which. And the next week, nobody showed up to the class because it had disturbed their unconscious so much. And as I thought about that, I realized, when you're watching the videos of somebody interviewing, it's quite different than you being either the therapist or the patient in the room. Third piece of information. I had 4 3-day individual, 3 all-day individual sessions with Dr. Davanloo, with me as the one whose unconscious was being mobilized. After that and during that, I just had a tremendous sense of his human presence in the room with me, and his massive focused effort to help me get to open up to things that I didn't even know were locked up inside of me. That tremendous sense of this, of another human being really just putting his heart and soul into helping me, and it goes back to, the part I shared about, I'm one of 11 kids. So there's a lot of rivalry about who got what. And after that, when I'll get to your question. After that, when I would watch the same tapes I'd seen many, many times before, I could really see differently the degree to which that was there with every one of these interviews. And the fact that when I would watch them before that, I would sort of go back and forth between identifying with the patient and identifying with him, and just having what he said impact on me for who I was. And once I was able to sort of separate from that, I could see every single one of those patients had that experience. And I realized in the mobilization program, where I interviewed other people and some of them interviewed me, it varied how much I felt that from them. Wow. Some of my colleagues, I felt they were right there, very similar to Davanloo. Some of them, it felt like they were being, sort of by rote. They were saying the right things at the right time, but their own unconscious was still sort of locked up. So to go back to your question, go ahead.
Well, is there a danger? Like, if in terms of the therapist, the ISTDP therapist, showing up with their own heart in that manner that you're describing, their own human presence, their heart and soul, if the ISTDP is too systematized and algorithmic, is there a danger that gets lost?
Well, if that's the way they if that's the way they use it, if
Mm.
their heart and if they've integrated that with their heart and soul, there's no danger at all. And that's the challenge of becoming a good therapist, whatever therapy you're using, is to find a way to own it, that you're really reaching out to the other human being in the room to help them. And that's why I think some of the people who, whose work with patients, they didn't, that I was talking before, they just weren't doing as good a job as some other people, but many of their patients got well is because there was a part of that sort of heart and soul of them that did come across and had an impact at an unconscious level. So to rotely reify metapsychological concepts when they didn't start out that way at all is a mistake. And whether you whether you do it as a Gestalt therapist or as a behavior therapist or whatever, or whether, so that's why I gave those three things, or whether what you call it doesn't matter. And the issue of it does matter in terms of you having a path to learning it. But when you're in the room with another human being, the issue is you and that other human being. And by the way, there's a literature behind that that's totally separate from Davanloo with Jerome Frank on the non-specific effects of psychotherapy. If you use this, you're familiar with his work?
Not actually. I'm not.
Yeah, he talked about this is non-specific effects of psychotherapy, going to somebody to a special place, to somebody who is identified as an expert, that expert interacting with you in a way that they're applying something with a sense of expertise and confidence that it can be of help. Those, that's what I haven't reviewed it in quite a while. I didn't know I was going to be talking about it, but those are some of the non-specific effects of any psychotherapy. And it's sort of like the placebo effect in drug trials. Patients with depression, the rate of placebo effect is quite high because you're going to someplace special where there's specialized care. You're seeing experts and you're seeing people who are caring and interested and helpful. And everybody that goes in there, whether on the drug or placebo, gets those benefits. So for a drug to be effective, it's got to be something above and beyond that to give you.
So if we look at a polarity scale, that on the one side, we have not showing up with your heart and mind, the therapist not showing up in a really human way, right? That being on the one side of the scale. Then on the other side of the scale, not having sufficient technical knowledge, procedural knowledge. Do you ever see that as a culprit?
What I'm not sure which you're saying is the culprit of what.
Well, in terms of effective psychotherapy, and particularly doing ISTDP, right? We've just talked about how Davanloo had this qualitative human presence of being laser focused, showing up with his heart and soul. And I think I'm hearing you say that that's not something that everybody can do. Not everybody shows up in that manner. And that, I think you're saying, tell me if I'm wrong, but that can lead to suboptimal treatments, not showing up, having your own resistance against emotional.
Yes, I am saying that because when I had the treatment, it was training formally, but the work on my unconscious with Dr. Davanloo that I mentioned before, I could tell that I got a lot better at connecting with my patients. I remember after 2 days of the first time I was there with Davanloo, we finished the day and I took a walk in a park in Montreal, and I just remember feeling maybe even a little bit elated. And I walked around and I saw a young family with a child and so on, and it brought a sense of internal delight and also a feeling of having some memories of an experience like that in my own early, when I was 2. I know it was when I was 2 because I it was here in Rochester before we moved down to Binghamton.
Oh.
And you know, my connection with the people I work with, and also in my life, was changed by that. Now, and I saw other people get more freed up and more effective in that way. So, yes, I think the more you can really be there, the more effective you are. And you know, if I had to say which is more important, the really being there is probably more important. I mean, I think of some people I know who just are, you know, people I've known who are not therapists at all. You know, there's a guy I went fishing with who was a financial advisor, and we went on a fishing in northern Saskatchewan. So it was a 4-day trip. So we were living in, you know, sharing the same living space and so on. And just seeing him connect with the other people there is like, you know, he would have been a great psychotherapist. He wasn't doing psychotherapy, but he just had a way of he was just really interested in everybody he met. And I'm sure everybody that he met sort of remembered that guy who's, you know, it's just, you know, and so that and you know, and then if you can combine those, it can be, the idea of being really therapeutic is the more you have both. But if you compare that to somebody who in a highly intellectualized way, you know, is looking for the right sentence to apply at the right time in sort of a you know, robotic way, the wrong sentence coming from the right place in the heart is going to be more effective than the other way around.
Wow. Have you ever seen?
I'm you see, you get my mind going, and I recall one of my supervisors who his name was Fred Pine. He did some work on the early observational work on child development with Margaret. What was her name? I don't remember the name, but it's you know, important work about the separation individuation phase. His name was Fred Pine, and he said, you know, patients will forgive you a mistake of the head, but not of the heart. And that you know, that stuck with me.
So powerful. So powerful. Have you ever seen the opposite, where a therapist has worked through a lot of their own resistance against emotional closeness, but there's a bit of a sort of flying by the seat of their pants and a lack of discipline in their clinical thinking? Does that ever become a problem?
Well, it's only a problem if their sense of connection is defective also, because the risk would be that you're, you know, if you're stirring things up, and that is a danger. You can stir things up that can precipitate a depression, which sort of gets on to one of your other questions. But that I have seen people who've had some training with Davanloo, and they learn to, you know, pressure and challenge, and pressure and challenge, and pressure and challenge, and they are not connected with what impact it's having on the person. And I saw a casualty. This is of somebody who had a year-long major depression that really crippled their functioning, precipitated by that kind of treatment. And I've seen that in more than one instance. That there's sort of and sometimes it's sort of like there's an identification with Davanloo that becomes sort of a caricature of him and the way he intervenes, that has some of the content of what he does, but without that connection. And if it's done is using the sort of pressure and challenge parts of it, that is, you know, that is a risk in terms of, especially in terms of more people are more towards the fragile side of the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is so valuable, everything you're sharing. I'm eating this up. Um, the focus on removing resistance against emotional closeness and really showing up in such a genuine, human, heartfelt manner. Would it be fair to say also the focus on removing the transference component of the resistance, removing any kind of transferential distortions, and really having being in genuine contact, right, with the patient? Do you think it's fair to say that that kind of a focus amounts to some sort of real relationship outside of a transferential relationship?
Well, I mean, you get into a whole issue that there's matters how you define terms of what is and isn't transference. When Davanloo talks about the complex transference feelings, he's talking about the positive and the negative, and there is a real part of it that the therapist is operating in a way that is creates a negative reaction because you're interfering with the patient, doing the things that makes them feel safe and comfortable, but you're doing it to help them get their freedom from things that are crippling to them. So the fact that there are both positive and negative feelings there is part of what is being defended against by the defenses. Now, I don't remember exactly what your question is now, so help me.
Yeah, no, I'm focused on the elements of the transference resistance that amount to distorting the figure of the therapist. Because it seems to me that when you break through the transference component of the resistance, the kind of closeness and emotional intimacy that seems to ensue seems to be something other that isn't there when the resistance is there, a kind of closeness, a kind of authenticity.
Yes. It's look, it's like the way I felt towards my fishing guide on that fishing trip when the last day we were supposed to be back at the docks at 5:00. Well, at 10 minutes to 5, we had a wonderfully successful time, but he really wanted us to give a try to trying to catch some of these really giant lake trout that are in this lake. I knew that was a possibility, but that wasn't the kind of fishing I liked most because you troll for them, and I'm a restless guy. I like to I like to be actively going after them, and and both physically and mentally. Well, that lure didn't work. Let's try this, or maybe So I had a lure that I brought with me for that. He said, "Yeah, that looks good. Okay, we'll put that on." So we put that in, and I caught this huge lake trout. And I was just so I was almost shocked at myself that I was so delighted. I mean, this is all catch and release, by the way. This lake trout was probably 30 years old. I mean, the last thing I'd want to do is have anything bad happen to me. And it was one of the things about the guide. He took care of that like it was a piece of gold to take care of it, so it wouldn't be injured by the process. And I felt just tremendously grateful for him because he was keeping us out on his own dime because he liked us, me and my buddy, and he wanted to share something that was something that he really liked. I mean, he'd go out in the evening on his own and fish for this kind of fish in the same areas. So yeah, so I had a very positive feeling towards him over something real. And I felt that way towards Dr. Davanloo. I mean, I felt that way to some extent all along because I felt like right from my first exposure to him, what he did just, even after the one time in San Francisco, I was a better therapist after that than I was when I went out there.
Wow.
Just having he was showing his work, which my supervisors weren't.
Yeah.
And I had one supervisor who did a live interview, and he was a guy who had a national reputation, published books, and he was trying to, he was sort of doing the applying the theory without really connecting with the person. He's talking about the young man wanted to get a camera with a zoom lens. He says, what do you think this zoom lens means? And he put his hands down by his crotch and said, like he was trying to say he wanted to have a big penis. And it was just so, ludicrous. But then you see Davanloo, is right out there. And so it had an impact on me, and I know it has an impact on others in their work when they're, I'm not pretending to be him, but I think my teaching has had that impact on people to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah. My impression was always that, with Davanloo's relentless focus on establishing genuine emotional contact with the patient and getting through the resistance, that even though I didn't see him write or I didn't hear him talk about the real relationship, it seems to be implied in the way he works. That's my impression.
Yeah, well, and there were times when he would talk about it, and including the issue of how things would go at termination.
Really? He sometimes talked about the real relationship?
Well, yeah, I mean, because the termination is I mean, I've seen a few of his. He didn't spend a lot of time on that, but there was a sense of saying goodbye. I mean, these are the words he would use when he would talk about it, saying goodbye with a sense of mutual admiration and affection. But that you were saying goodbye to each other in life. That your real relationship was over what you were finishing doing with each other, and if it was somebody in training, like with me, it would be that we're we're saying goodbye to that part of our relationship. For example, the last time I saw him, between the time before and that time, my father had died. I came into the session. So this is a 3-day meeting. I came into the session saying, Dr. Davanloo, there's something I think I should tell you before we go. He says, no, that'll have to wait. Let's see how you feel towards me right now. And he was blocking me from doing that. So at the end of the third day, because it wasn't, he would always review things in sort of a didactic teaching way about what he'd done and what had happened. He says, Dr. Schubmehl, and the fact that my father died came out later in that first day. He says, you understand why I did that? I said, I think it's because you didn't want to just open up the grief and then the work on my, the destructive organization of my unconscious would be flooded away by that. He said, that's exactly right. He says, but, I met your father. My father came to one of a couple of Davanloo's presentations, and he met, and we went out to dinner together. And Davanloo had been both an outdoorsman, which my dad was, hunting and that sort of stuff, and also played tennis, and had some of the same connections with the psychiatric world, and had made a nice thing. I remember. And I remember, when we had dinner at your house, he says, I almost never accept such an invitation, but I did so when we gave one of the presentations in Rochester. We hosted him at our home, and this was fairly early on. So my dad and mom were there, and my mom had known Anna Freud in Philadelphia. She attended a seminar, a regular meeting seminar, and she remembers how Anna talked about that her dad was a very warm person, which, I've never heard that description from anybody else, but is, so that, so there was, and then, so he said, I remember your dad, and we talked about this and that, and he was a nice man, and and he said, I'm sorry for your loss. And just, with real, with real warmth.
Warmth and humanity.
And humanity, yeah. And that's, and he, because we have, I mean, have not been in contact with him for years, and I don't even know if he's still alive. I know his wife died. But we had a degree of a real relationship. We had dinners with he and I, or he and I and Alan Bieber, and it included talking about all sorts of stuff. And so there was a real relationship, and that real side of him came out then. And I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't the least bit surprised. And so, yeah, I mean, there, and with my own patients, when I closed my practice, one patient who was a psychoanalytic, who was a psychiatric social worker and a therapist at Strong. She and her husband came in, and he threatened to sue me for retiring. And he was serious. And I mean, she sort of, Dr. Schubmehl has a right to retire, because I was making all the appropriate referrals and everything.
And also by the way, this is so touching. This is gold to me to hear all of this. It really is. In some of the transcripts, Davanloo would say, I'm not neutral here. I hope you decide to take down the wall, but the choice is yours. I also felt that was a way that he was being really real and showing up as a person, that he was honest, that he actually that he had hopes for the patient.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's some sort of systematic things that he would do that, especially with depressed people, because depressed people have trouble mobilizing the energy to stand up to their defenses. For example, he would, at some point, as he was building towards working to open the unconscious, would find out, sometimes by even asking more or less explicitly what some of the things were that they were important about their abilities. So, for example, one woman who had problems with depression, who had had a pretty traumatic childhood, but had gotten some previous therapy and had some positive life experiences that led her to go from not wanting to have children to wanting to have children. And by the time he saw her, she had children, and she felt that she was doing a good job of being a good mother. So he had that history. And then when he was pushing her to overcome the resistance, he says, "We know you're a capable woman. You have mothered those children the way you have, and they are doing well, and you have your achievements." But he wouldn't say just you have your achievements unless he knew what they were. It couldn't be bullshit. And so he would refer to the specific things. So there's a capable side of you, but then there's a destructive side that wants to give up and sell yourself short. So you want to bow down to that, or it's always the helping them to mobilize the hope, and the implicit communication is that you believe in them. And you can see that side of them.
The way you're simulating these interventions is just how I remember so much of what Davanloo did in the tapes that I saw. And it was a big part of what I was taught by Marvin, frankly, this element of standing up to the superego, modeling for the patient how to stand up to the superego resistance. I don't necessarily...
That's well put, the issue of modeling, the identification with the therapist's attitude. It goes to the one question you had about talking down to the
yes. That is not spoken a whole lot about in the circles that I travel in. Would you be willing to discuss a little bit about talking down to the superego, and to what extent that was actually really central to Davanloo's work?
That's when I wrote some notes on. Let me look at my notes.
Yeah, go for it.
Where was that? 2, 4. I have 5 words I wrote down as notes about that.
Mhm.
Your question is, how central important is it to convey disrespect to the resistance and talk down to the superego? And my answer was, at the right time, very. The issue is, you can only talk down to it when the patient is with you. So if you just go in there and start talking down to it, you're attacking him or her.
Yeah.
Because they're identified with that part of themselves. So
Yeah.
you need Davanloo would say you need a rise in the transference. You need an activation of the process and a connection, enough of a therapeutic connection that when you're talking about that, the patient understands that, well, it's sort of what I just modeled a couple minutes ago.
That's right.
So you can take this, on the one hand, another patient comes into my mind, one of my patients who actually I got some supervision from Davanloo. So you can take this weepy, crippled, incapable position, and you've already shared with me that you have a tendency to sell yourself short in life and bow down to this destructive master. But then we know there's another side to you, because I mean, you have advanced degrees, you have a successful business, you have you have a set of good friends. That there's also a very capable side. But then you want to present the destructive part, wants to present yourself as though that doesn't exist, or you want to mobilize that to stand up to that, this crippling destructive part that says you have to live the life of he would say I forgot what he said. I like the idea of a worm in the sewer. He had a metaphor that was similar to that, existing. This is why should you bow down to this destruction? So that's talking down to them. I'm sure Marvin, because he always loved that. And I think it first came up with Marvin was the issue of Churchill during the Battle of Britain, when the Germans are bombing the shit out of London every day and every night. Well, a lot of it was nighttime bombing, and Churchill would get on the radio. We will meet them in the streets. We will meet them. Marvin does it better than I do. I can see in your eyes.
Battle to the bitter end, right?
Yeah. Then I also, have you seen the movie Casablanca?
Yeah, long ago.
Okay. I mean, Rick, the main character, is talking to the head of the German, the German pseudo government in Casablanca, and the guy is very arrogant, saying, "Well, we'll be, next we'll be in your hometown." And Rick says, "Well, there's certain parts of New York City I'd advise you to avoid," which, I mean, it's just the talking down to the superego, and then singing La Marseillaise when the German soldiers want to sing Deutschland über alles. You don't remember? That's one it's a movie I've watched several times, but they're in Rick's cafe. There are a bunch of German soldiers there who start singing Deutschland über alles, but it's in an occupied area of French colony, and there are a lot more, people who are basically French there, and they start singing the French national anthem, which has been forbidden by the Germans, and override, out-sing the Germans, and say, the hell with your guns and so on.
So when the superego resistance is very egosyntonic and the patient identifies with it, what's the surest way of helping the patient differentiate from that resistance so that you can begin to talk down to the superego?
Well, with egosyntonicity, I mean, the issue is you have to get it enough ego dystonic that you can connect with the patient. And you bring up a valuable learning experience that it is somewhat embarrassing, where I had somebody who was egocentric. This was during the first year or two of training, and I start talking down to and the guy walks out.
Mhm.
Oh shit, what happened? You know,
Mhm.
and 15 minutes later, he came back. He says, "I think we should continue."
Mm.
I
Mm.
said, "Oh, so you know, so it had been, and he had it had gotten through a little bit, but I
Mm.
was wrong. I also had another man who I just did the initial evaluation with. It was where early on we'd have two of us do separate evaluations, and I was not going to be treating this man because I actually was going to treat his wife, who was actually the first person. The wife was the first person I brought to supervision with Davanloo, and he was egocentric, and I did this my version of a head-on collision with him, and and I had all the right words at the end of his, yeah, but there's something else I think we ought to talk about. And it's like nothing I'd said had any impact on him whatsoever. uh, because they're just, we weren't, he wasn't with me. He had me so shut out. So you have to find a way in, and the way in is often by doing some work that's similar to restructuring patients who are fragile or depressed, by working some in the C and some in the T, and in a way that is at first starting out with where they're at, which often is sort of the cognitive, and then uh, you know pushing some, but if you just go in and talk down to the superego like you might if you've got the major, a significant degree of mobilization of the transference feeling, and you're, you have a sense that the patient is with you, and you've already, it's already clear that the work you've done has made the defense is ego dystonic enough that you can say, so you want to continue to, to take this crippled, incapable position where you have to bow down to the master and continue your crippled life, intellectualizing, ruminating, sitting on the fence, things that you've already identified, and that
Yeah,
they know.
they
Then
know.
you can really talk down to it heavily. But
Yeah,
so it's the degree to which you're talking down to it. What did I
yeah,
say? At the right time, very, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. No, this is invaluable. This is invaluable. Now, let me circle back. You said that when your father had died and you met him and you were gearing up to share this information with him, and he said, no, no, that'll have to wait. And then he went for, how are you feeling towards me? Right. And then the explanation down the road was we
Because
needed
you
to
can
get.
see that I was anxious also, by the way.
Okay, okay, yeah. The destructive organization, not to have that washed away with grief. And so I'm so interested because I've also heard that sometimes grief can lubricate the unconscious, but here, obviously, the implication is that it can get in the way of the reactive feelings. Could you elaborate?
Well, I think that this is because this is grief that was real and recent and active and profound. There can be grief that you activate that's been buried, that then is part of the process of doing what you just said, of helping somebody who's been sort of locked up be in touch with the fact that there's a feeling side to them. Uh, but to it's funny, you can't, that same thing came up the other way around. I was scheduled to see him for the very first mobilization like that one summer, and I was in Montreal for a core group, and I had just found out before going to the core group that my father was diagnosed with he had prostate cancer that was quite well advanced when it was discovered. And so and I'd known he'd said something about you don't want to try to do this if there's some active thing going on. So I said, I don't know what to do with this. He says, well, we should delay our meeting for at least, I forgot what he said, 3 months or something.
Really?
So we did. So, but then the second one was it was really in a working through process. So that was somewhat different because there was already an intense involvement in the therapeutic process with him. That had a life, a separate life that was well enough developed to sort of keep from being overridden, but he didn't want to run the risk. I think would be my guess.
Does that mean that if someone is in a crisis and having some very active conscious feelings, that the unconscious is not as accessible? Is that the implication?
Well, in a way, yes and no. There may be issues in the unconscious that are more accessible, but if what you're wanting to do is work on getting to the bottom of the characterologic issues, the characterologic issues have to be active, and in crisis they often are sort of overwhelmed. And this is where and he talked about his mentorship at Massachusetts General Hospital with, I forgot the guy's name, but it was a psychiatrist who wrote about people in crisis, and the fact that in crisis your defenses were often overwhelmed, but then when people after time and pull themselves back together, their characterologic defenses are they reconsolidate. So the therapeutic process has many features, and experiencing feelings by bypassing the defenses, if those defenses are part of the destructive part of the person, may not give them the same degree of relief and long-term change that working through those defenses to get at that stuff does. Another example that comes to mind is I saw a interview by a military psychiatrist at the APA, and I forgot if it was under hypnosis or with sort of an Amatol interview, but a man who'd had a horrible post-traumatic stress event, and he was working through that event with him, and a lot of what you saw was the man was very in touch with all of these, very intense, painful feeling. His unit had been ambushed by the VC, and then and he was enraged and in pain, and it resonated with traumas from his early life. And I think he grew up in a poor, socially disorganized situation in New York City, and then he was so enraged that he, in an unauthorized way, sort of loaded him up like some sort of a Rambo, and went out and just hunting down and killing VC, and then was sort of found in a sort of a fugue state in the forest at some point, and brought back, and had been hospitalized on and off most of the time since the war. So he on the one hand, he experienced all this, but then, of course, the question came up is, so did this help him? He says, well, no, I didn't remember any of it after he was out of the hypnotic state, or there wasn't any real integration the way there is with.
To what extent did you hear Davanloo talk about systems of resistance? That'll be my last question.
Oh, which was your first question?
Yeah.
I don't remember ever hearing him use that term. But again, that also goes back to that sentence I read. But when some of the contact you and I had beforehand, I mean, he talked about the resistances that had to do with had developed in people who basically had a healthier childhood, and that developed resistances that were related to isolation of affect, like intellectualization, rationalization, things of that ilk, that where one just with a mental process is able to metabolize the feelings enough to keep them.
Mm.
Hang on. See if I can talk with a cough drop. Give me a second.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's the obsessional defenses, the isolation.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, that's exactly same word, same. Not to be confused with an obsessional disorder, but yeah. So that's one, and that category, as it were, is somebody falls in that category if they have those defenses that work that way. They keep the person from actually experiencing feelings, and it's generally a when those are effective, they also tend to correlate with being on the side of the spectrum where the anxiety is channeled into strided muscle tension. So it's sort of a combination of it goes into the various mental activities, but also into the tension. And I mean, I'm sure you know those, the muscles in the hands and up the shoulders,
skeletal muscle.
Yeah, as opposed to the smooth muscle, such as in the having to do with migraine headaches, asthma, or irritable bowel, and also then into the cognitive system, and those. Excuse me, I need a little more sucking on my.
Oh, take your time.
Yep. It's helping though. Those defenses tend to correlate, those channels tend to correlate with more regressive defenses like weepiness, panicky feelings, instead of the deep sighing respirations. It's more like a panting respiration. Various forms of explosive outbursts. I have a teaching tape. The man was a professional musician who had to use his hands, both hands, in his profession, and I did not recognize his vulnerability and pressured him, and he also had some religious background, and at some point he starts sort of banging his hands and blasting loudly nonsense syllables. And I mean, this was a highly educated man, but he was sort of speaking in tongues, as it were. This is a time when that somehow that was very popular for a while in the evangelical Christians. And I was so concerned, I reached over and held his hand so he wouldn't hurt them, because he needed them for his work. And when Davanloo saw that, no, he wasn't going to hurt himself, but this is what you did wrong, son. And in fact, I had sorted out myself during the interview and corrected course, and actually got an unlocking in that interview. But it was another example of what we were talking about before, is to being disrespect. What is it? Showing talking down to the defenses if the patient isn't with you and isn't. You're not connected over what's going on. It can have its risk.
Yes. That sounds like a real human moment too. You holding his hands to protect him.
Yeah.
Did he appreciate that? Did that further the treatment that you did that?
probably, but I don't remember that being something that came. I mean, the outcome of the treatment was very good, and he was. I mean, he was very pleased with the outcome of the treatment.
Yeah.
And I had a follow-up interview with him, and I had permission to use it for teaching, and the damn thing didn't record.
Oh, oh. So isolation of affect, and then repression, and then projection and splitting.
Well, yeah, the regressive defenses would be the category.
Yeah.
That's the closest thing to what you're. You know, I never heard Davanloo call them systems of defense, but maybe he did. And I don't object to that term. I mean, as you know, as you can see, I'm not. It's sort of like whatever works for a given individual's way of understanding what they're doing, as long as it is connected to the truth of what's going on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Dr. Schubmehl, this has been incredible for me. I'm just so grateful. I don't want to torture you any longer with what's going on there with your I can't thank you enough. This is very meaningful to me. You're painting a picture, you're bringing your time with Davanloo to life. This is an incredible portrait that's emerging, and I'm just very grateful.
You're welcome. As a guy I don't know very well, was having dinner with the other night, says, you know, people like telling their stories, and and I do too. I mean, I'm glad to share this, because going back to what I said at the beginning, I mean, I have just been incredibly lucky in life, and you know, the sorts of things I've shared with you have brought richness to my life beyond what I ever would have dreamed would have been possible.